The first false miracle Mirren Callis diagnosed was asleep in her son's chest, not in the Hall of Restorative Works, where the Empire kept its clean tablets and cleaner language, not under the white lamps of the triage floor, where men with borrowed years sat beside children whose shadows moved a heartbeat late, not in any sealed report stamped with Director Salvo's red wax and filed where frightened clerks could pretend a locked drawer was the same thing as a cure. It was in Aaron, her son, her miracle. He slept on his side beneath a thin wool blanket, one fist tucked under his chin, the way he had done before lung fever, before the root priests came with their green-threaded needles and the imperial permit that had said a child could be saved if his mother signed away the right to call the saving sacred. Mirren held a candle low and watched the seam beneath his ribs darken like bark after rain. It had been pale when the priest left him, a thin line, almost beautiful, if a mother was tired enough and grateful enough to mistake anything for beauty. The root priest had called it restorative trace work. The attending officer had called it non-invasive vegetative reinforcement. Mirren, who had spent 12 years teaching younger healers that names mattered, had let both phrases stand because Aaron's fever broke just before midnight and his breathing steadied before dawn. That was the first bargain. This was the bill. The seam pulsed once. Under the skin, something answered with the slow patience of spring. Mirren set the candle down on the stool beside his bed and pressed 2 fingers near the mark. Warm, human warm, not fever warm. His breathing was steady, no stiffness in the jaw, no discoloration in the lips, no tremor in the fingers, no outward sign that would justify waking the lower ward. Filing a child under root change and inviting 3 imperial observers to stand over her son's bed with ink tablets and careful voices. Aaron opened his eyes anyway. Mama? Mirren drew her hand back too quickly. That frightened him more than the candle, more than the hour, more than the way her mouth had forgotten how to be ordinary. It's early, she said. Go back to sleep. He looked down at himself. The blanket had slipped just enough for him to see the dark line near his ribs. Is it worse? Mirren was a healer. She had cut rot from soldiers' shoulders while they sang through clenched teeth. She had held children born silent while their mothers asked questions the gods never answered. She had taught patience how to tell a dying man the truth without making the truth cruel. She lied to her son because he was 7. No, she said, it's only changing color. That happens sometimes with old healing. Aaron considered this with the grave suspicion children's reserve for adults who are trying to sound calm. Like bruises? A little. It doesn't hurt. Good. It itches when I dream. The room seemed to narrow around the bed. Outside the shutters, the imperial bells had not yet rung first light. Rain tapped softly against roof tiles of the Hall of Restorative Works below them. Somewhere in the building, night clerks were still moving records through the archive slots, filing the sick into categories that made them easier to store than to save. Mirren picked up her diagnostic slate from the desk, bone white, thumb length, smooth except for the imperial sunburst cut through the top edge. She had just used hundreds of them and trusted none of them completely. What kind of dream? Aaron shrugged under the blanket. Dirt, mostly, and water. Not bad water, deep water, like when roots drink. Mirren kept her face still. Do you hear anything? Sometimes. Words? Not words. He touched the seam through his nightshirt. More like something knows where I am. The slate in Mirren's hand warmed. A diagnostic phrase surfaced across it in thin brown letters. Restorative trace response. Then the letters blurred, as if the slate itself had taken a breath. Root calm. Early. Mirren closed her fist around the slate until the edges bit into her palm. Aaron saw enough. Mama, he whispered, are the roots taking me back? There were correct answers. There were imperial answers. There were the answers printed in the handbooks Saval required every healer archivist to memorize. Root, reactive, symptoms are life, imperial oversight, and the low incident of irreversible vegetative onset. Mirren had helped write that sentence. She hated herself for it now. No, she said, and this time she made it sound true, because a lie badly told is just fear handed to a child. Nothing is taking you anywhere while I'm here. Aaron relaxed because he still believed her power was larger than the world. Mirren sat beside him until he slept again. The seam faded slowly, not gone, never gone, only pale enough for daylight. When the first bell rang beneath the floorboards, Mirren rose, dressed, and placed the diagnostic slate into the inner pocket of her work robe instead of the household ash box where private fears belong. By law, every miracle abnormality had to be reported. By love, she decided this one would wait until she understood what reporting meant. That was the first unlawful thing Mirren Callis did for the truth. It would not be the last. Before sunrise, porters opened the eastern doors and rolled out the brass rails that separated walk-ins from transfers, transfers from military cases from sanctioned divine work complications. By first light, clerks had hung the day's classification boards above the triage floor. Delayed death, devotional fever, tied lung, pneumonic contamination, root change. Mirren stood beneath the last board longer than she should have. Callous? She turned before anyone could notice. Director Selville crossed the triage floor with his hands folded behind his back, stepping around the first puddle of seawater as if dry stone produced brine before breakfast was an inconvenience in a hallway maintenance. He didn't look old, but he carried authority like an older man's cane, visibly, rhythmically, and with the expectation that others would make room for it. You're early, he said. So are the patients. Patients have the luxury of urgency. We have the burden of sequence. It was the kind of sentence Saville liked, balanced, even though it sounded wise, empty enough to hold whatever policy he needed later. Mirren looked past him. A soldier sat on the nearest bench with his helmet in his lap. He was young, perhaps 20, with mud still drying along the hem of his campaign coat. A death ribbon had been tied around his wrist in the old style. Someone had tried to remove it and failed. The knot had tightened into a black line. Beside him, a tide-blessing navigator coughed into a basin. Clear seawater splashed against the brass. She had not been near the coast in 6 months. At the far end of the hall, 2 attendants urgently, softly, with a memory worker who kept repeating a confession in a voice that was not hers. Saville followed Mirren's gaze. The court wants a unified memorandum by tomorrow morning. A unified memorandum on what? On the instability. Which instability? He gave her a mild look. Mirren regretted the question because she already knew the answer. All of it. Saville held out a red waxed folder. Death, continuance, irregularities. Fire engine devotional residues. Tide lung events. Unauthorized memory bleed. Root change escalation. 3 suspected cases of shadow erasure in the northern census. 1 time debt birth in Olin province if the midwife's account survives review. That's not 1 illness. Then make it 1 report. A report isn't a cure. No, Saville said. But panic is contagious, and language is the first quarantine. Mirren took the folder. The wax seal carried the imperial sunburst, and beneath it, in smaller script, the mark of the Office of Sacred Applications. 10 years ago, the office had been a theoretical advisory council. Now, it issues permits, extraction quotas, miracle licenses, and correction orders. The gods were still worshipped in public. In private, they were administered. I need access to the restricted archive, Mirren said. Granted. That surprised her. Saville noticed. Don't mistake obstruction for prudence, Callus. I don't need a pleasant report. I need a useful one. Useful to whom? To the living. From another man, it might have sounded cruel. From Saville, it sounded like a diagnosis. The dead soldier's name was Corin Vale, and he apologized every time he breathed. They told me it was disrespectful, he said. Mirren sat across from him with a diagnostic glass between them. The glass was old, temple work, older than the Empire's current vocabulary for it. In a proper death rite, it was meant to cloud when the last door stood near. In imperial use, it had been relabeled as a terminal proximity instrument. The left side of the glass remained clear, the right side filmed over white. Corin watched it with exhausted embarrassment. Breathing? Mirren asked. Breathing after, he swallowed. After the certificate. A clerk had attached the document in his case statement. Mirren read it twice. Corin Vale, infantry, 3rd line, Edrith recovery column. Declared dead under emergency, death continuance right. Return to breath 6 hours after certification. Status, administratively unresolved. Do you feel pain? No. Hunger? I remember it. Cold. People keep asking me that. And? Corin looked toward the windows, where morning rain turned the city roofs silver. I know it's raining, he said. I know rain is cold. I know I used to hate wet socks. But knowing isn't feeling. Mirren wrote that down exactly. Saville would prefer reduced thermal response. The court would prefer post-continuance. Sensory diminishment. The Office of Sacred Applications would prefer non-fatal right drift. Corin deserved at least one sentence no one had cleaned. Do you know why the rite was performed? Captain said the line needed witnesses who wouldn't fall before giving testimony. His mouth twisted. I fell anyway. Then I got up after they wrote me down. Who wrote you down? I don't know. A field register. Young woman, I think. Hands shaking. She said the book didn't like it. Mirren stopped writing. The book? The death ledger. Black cover. Iron corners. She opened it and looked like she had heard something speak from inside a wall. The old stories in the archive had begun as jokes among clerks. A ledger that disputed officials. A prisoner whose death refused to become clean. A young scribe reprimanded for treating ink as if it had a conscience. Mirren had dismissed them as professional superstition. Corin leaned closer. The clouded side of the diagnostic glass thickened. Healer, he said, am I in trouble for not staying dead? Mirren looked at the boy with the death ribbon cutting black around his wrist, and for one dangerous second she saw Aaron asking whether the roots were taking him back. No, she said. It was not a lawful answer. It was the only one she could give. The Tide Blessing navigator had been born 200 miles from the nearest coast. Her name was Laurel Teth, and until 3 months ago she had never seen the sea. The Empire had found her in a counting house in the inland town of Venel, where she balanced grain accounts by listening to rainwater move through gutters. A recruitment priest told her the tide god had marked her bloodline for service. An imperial physician told her the mark was non-hereditary and medically stable. A magistrate told her refusal would be interpreted as obstruction of the maritime defense. Lore told Mirren all of this while coughing seawater into a basin. The water was clear, no river silt, no roof dust. Salt formed white at the rim of the brass. No, that's worse, isn't it? Not always. Lore gave a small laugh and immediately pressed a cloth to her mouth. You sound like the officer who said drowning on dry land was preferable to drowning at sea, because no ship was lost. Mirren's pen paused. Who said that? Commodore Aide. He meant it kindly. I think that made it worse. The basin chimed. One clear drop had fallen into the seawater and sent a perfect ring across the surface. Then another. Then another. There was no leak above them. No pipe. No hidden condensation. The ceiling was dry gray stone. Lore shut her eyes. There, she whispered. Do you hear them? Hear what? Bells. Underwater bells. They keep ringing under everything. Mirren listened. The hall was full of ordinary sounds. Clerks calling names. Wheels over stone. A child crying because a slate had turned black in his mother's hands. Beneath it all, the imperial bells marked the second hour with solemn brass certainty. No underwater bells. Lore opened her eyes again, and for a moment they didn't look like eyes made for air. They made reflective light as if something deep beneath them had turned. They want the ship back, she said. Who does? I don't know. The drowned, maybe. The god, the tide itself. Laura looked embarrassed by her own answer. That sounds like superstition. Superstition is just a diagnosis made before the Empire proves the vocabulary. Laura stared at her. Mirren had not meant to say it out loud. She wrote, auditory manifestation described as bells beneath water, dry environment, Salt production confirmed. Subject reports. Reclamation pressure associated with Imperial navigation blessing. Then she crossed out object. Patient. Then she crossed out patient. Lore. Saville would hate that. A third dropped from the dry ceiling and struck the basin. This time, Mirren heard it. Not the splash, the bell. The memory worker confessed in 5 different accents before noon. Her own name was Basha Arlen. Mirren had verified it against 3 civil rolls, 1 workhouse contract, and the mark on her left thumb from the Archive Guild. Basha had been trained to store testimony for magistrates and soldiers whose minds had to remain clear enough after witnessing too much. She had never left the capital. According to the words coming out of her mouth, she had also smothered a prince in Nollis, drowned a tax collector in the South Canal, hidden a courier beneath a fig tree outside Edrith, and buried a field hospital after flags changed color at dusk. None of the voices were hers. "I don't know these people," Basha said when her own voice came back. "Please write that down before it goes away again. I don't know them." Mirren wrote it down. Beside her, Junior Archivist Pell pretended not to tremble. "The fig tree case is sealed," Pell whispered. "Director's level. No one outside the East Records room should know the detail." "Then she didn't invent it." "No. And she didn't do it." Pell swallowed. "No. She was 6 years old when it happened." Basha's eyes changed focus. When she spoke again, the voice was old, male, and tired. "I told them not to take the bridge," she said. "The western supports were already cracked, but the prince wanted the banners seen from the river road, so I smiled and gave the order. I can still hear the horses. I can still—" She clapped both hands over her mouth until the voices stopped. Mirren crouched in front of her. "Basha, look at me." The memory worker shook her head. "They're not memories," she said through her fingers. "They're verdicts." That word settled between them. Pell looked toward the classification boards as if one might offer comfort. Pneumonic contamination, unauthorized memory bleed, archive overexposure, sympathetic guilt transfer. The words were ready. The Empire always had words ready. It kept them sharpened and clean, lined in drawers like surgical knives. A suffering person entered one end of the drawer, and a manageable term came out the other. Mirren thought of Aaron dreaming of roots that knew where he was. Corin apologized for death. Lore hearing bells no ceiling could hold. "Who put them in you?" Mirren asked. Basha lowered her hands. Her pupils had widened until the brown nearly vanished. "They were already in the gift," she said, in a voice like a room full of people speaking from behind locked doors. "You opened it. You called it mercy. You called it progress. You called it ours." Every diagnostic slate on the table cracked at once. No one screamed. That was the worst part. By the year of false miracles, even terror had learned to wait for permission. Director Saville ordered the triage hall cleared by 3rd bell. Not closed, cleared. There was a difference. Closed meant panic. Cleared meant procedure. The patients were moved behind privacy screens. The clerks were ordered to continue copying summaries, and the attendants were told to smile at anyone waiting outside the eastern door. "A controlled morning," Saville said. standing beside the cracked slates. Mirren looked at the floor, where seawater had run into the grooves between stones and dried into salt lines that resembled a map. If this is controlled, I don't want to see failure. Failure would be letting 5 categories become one rumor. Maybe they are one thing. Savil's face didn't change. That was how Mirren knew she had said something dangerous. He dismissed Pell with a glance. The junior archivist gathered the broken slates and escaped too quickly to preserve dignity. When they were alone behind the screen, Savil took the red waxed folder from Mirren's hand and opened it. You have always been valuable because you resist mystical explanations. I resist lazy explanations. Good, then continue resisting them. Director, the dominions are crossing. Death rites, tide blessings, memory work, root healing, fire engines. They aren't failing separately. They're behaving like parts of one wound. Savil closed the folder. Do not use that word in your memorandum. Wound? Any word that would suggest urgency. Injury, retaliation, blame. What would you prefer? Instability. Instability doesn't cough seawater. No, but it can be treated, managed, funded, investigated. It can be assigned committees and contaminant thresholds. Savil stepped closer, his voice lowered. A wound has a wounder. A wound asked who held the knife. Mirren thought of Aaron's question. Are the roots taking me back? Maybe we need to ask that. Maybe you do. The court does not. For the first time that day, Savil looked tired. Not frightened, not guilty, tired. The way men become tired after holding a door shut and deciding the thing behind it was less important than the people in front. Listen to me, Callus. The Empire has won 3 wars in 5 years because the Divine Applications Program works. Grain rot reversed in the eastern provinces. Edrith Gate held. The old king survived long enough to name a lawful successor. Children who would have died are breathing. He let the last sentence sit between them. Mirren hated him for using Aaron without saying his name. She hated him more because it worked. If people believe the gifts are cursed, Savil continued, they will refuse treatment, abandon ports, burn registries, murder priests, hide the sick, and call every fever divine revenge. Thousands will die of ordinary causes while we debate extraordinary ones. And if the gifts are cursed, then we need time to understand the mechanism before the truth becomes a weapon in every frightened mouth. Mirren said nothing. Savil returned the folder. Restricted Archive, Lower Ward, Black Ledger Annex. You have full access until morning. Produce a unified diagnosis. Leave theology out of it. Savil turned away. Then find better language. Mirren looked down at the red waxed folder in her hands. For the first time in her career, the sealed documents felt less like records than kindling. The restricted archive didn't smell like paper. It smelled like wax, iron, old rain, and the fear kept too long in sealed rooms. Shelves rose into the dimness on both sides of Mirren. As the archive doors, each shelf held bone-white tubes, black lacquered boxes, fireproof slates, salt-sealed jars, memory mirrors wrapped in linen, and ledgers chained shut by offices that no longer existed. A clerk with gray hair and no expression escorted her to a reading table beneath a single hanging lamp. Director's authority, Mirren said, offering Savile's stamped order. The clerk read it and decided neither was worth arguing with. Which series? All divine applications. Adverse reports from the last 5 years. Cross domain. Include sealed military summaries. The clerk's hand paused over the index wheel. That is not a series. Then make it a pile. For the first time all day, someone almost smiled. The pile took 40 minutes and filled the table. Mirren started with the obvious files. Root change, tide lung, memory bleed, delayed death, devotional burns, shadow erasure, time debt births. The classifications looked separate at first because each office had written as if the body were a border and the gods obeyed department lines. They did not. A fire engine report described workers losing beloved details while output increased. A memory case described a child born knowing the funeral song of a village drowned before her birth. A root healing report described a soldier's shattered leg repairing with bark-like strength, then refusing to cross paved roads. A death continuance right described a magistrate's preserved past, his final breath, who could only remember cases in which he had condemned the innocent. Benefit, cost, denial, repeat. By sixth bell, Mirren's notes had stopped looking like diagnosis and started looking like accusation. Then she opened the Edrith file. The cover sheet was official, revised, and bloodlessly clear. Ember engine ignition event. Casualty category, non-fatal pneumonic reduction. Strategic outcome, gate, preserved. Operational recommendation, controlled devotional fuel, trials under supervision. Attached beneath it was a thinner page, not properly filed. Someone had hidden it badly or preserved it carefully. The script was uneven, as if written by hand that had spent too long near heat. Statement of Ash Priest Nanmar. Captured flame servant. Recorded after ignition. Mirren read the line twice. It didn't malfunction. It answered. The lamp above her flickered once, though no draft moved. Mirren pressed her palm flat over the page, not to hide it, to keep it from feeling alone. For a moment she imagined Tavern Soul in some recovery ward with a bare wrist and missing song, unable to prove to anyone that victory had taken more than the dead. The report had tried to make him small. Nanmar's sentence made the wound large again. The Black Ledger Annex was lower than the restricted archive and colder than the lower ward. That felt wrong to Mirren. A death registry archive should have smelled like dust, ink, stone. This place smelt like the threshold after rain. The corridor narrowed until the lamp in her hand seemed less like a tool than a request. Gray-haired clerk stopped. "I don't enter," he said. Mirren looked at him. "You work here." "I work outside." "Why?" "Because pages turn when no one touches them." He said it as if admitting a plumbing issue. Mirren took Savile's orders from her sleeve. The clerk shook his head. "Paper opens doors. It doesn't decide what comes through." He left her with the key. Inside, the annex was small, too small for the dread around it. 3 cabinets, 1 reading stand, 1 stone basin dry as a bone. Chains looped through the cabinet handles, each link stamped with the imperial sunburst over an older symbol that had been hammered flat. A door. Not drawn, not carved clearly enough to accuse anyone of preserving worship, just the shape of a person noticed after looking too long at damage. Mirren unlocked the center cabinet. The copied page waited in a black folder. She knew it before she opened it. A name, a prisoner, a death order before its hour. A young scribe named Sarah Venn, a mark no official had authorized. Disputed. The word sat in the copy like coal that had refused to cool. Mirren laid her diagnostic slate beside it. For 3 breaths, nothing happened. Then the slate erased itself. Root claim, early, vanished. Death continuance irregularity, vanished. Pneumonic contamination, vanished. Tide lung, vanished. The slate remained blank long enough for Mirren to hear her own pulse. Then new words appeared. Refusal response. The ink on Sarah's copied page darkened. Not much. Enough. Mirren sat down slowly. The Empire had not discovered broken miracles. It had been contradicted. Aaron was awake when she returned to the apartment. Mirren had not meant to go back before nightfall. She told herself she needed the household records, the original root healing consent form, the vial of green thread that Priest had left behind. All of that was true enough to stand beside the other reason. She needed to see him breathing. He sat at the table with a heel of bread in one hand and her medical primer opened in the front of him. The primer was upside down. "You're reading advanced work," she said. "I'm checking if roots have ears." Mirren stopped in the doorway. Aaron looked up. "They don't. In the pictures." "No, they don't." "Then how do they know where to grow?" It was exactly the kind of question he asked before breakfast. Practical, merciless, too large for the morning. Mirren crossed the room and shut the primer. "They follow water, warmth, stone cracks, things they need." "Do people do that?" "Sometimes. Is that why priests found me? Because I needed them?" Mirren sat across from him. The honest answer was ugly. The priests hadn't found Aaron. Mirren had found them. She had signed 3 forms, knelt on a cold floor, handed over her welding ring for the application fee, and let a calm officer explain that imperial miracle work was not worship and should not be confused with unsanctioned divine petition. She had not cared what they called it. Her child was dying. "I found them," she said. Aaron nodded as if this confirmed something important. "So if the roots want me, they have to ask you?" Mirren tried to smile. Failed. He touched the seam beneath his shirt. In the dream, they weren't mean. "No?" "No, they were sad." The apartment seemed suddenly too high above the earth. "What were they sad about?" "Being cut." Aaron looked toward the floor, toward the archive levels beneath them, toward stone and roots and whatever old thing had noticed him in sleep, and being used for people who don't say thank you. Mirren closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of Savile saying the living, the court saying stability, the priests saying restorative tracework, herself saying it was only changing color. "Mama? I'm here. If a miracle is mad, does that mean I shouldn't be alive?" The question hit harder than any diagnosis. Mirren crossed to him so quickly the chair scraped stone. She knelt and took both of his hands. No, listen to me. You are not a mistake. But if they stole it, you are not the thief. Her voice broke, then steadied because he needed the steadiness more than she needed the truth to sound wounded. You are what I was trying to save. Those are different things. Aaron searched her face. Can you fix it? Mirren wanted to say yes. Instead, because love had already made her lie once that day, and she could not afford to make it a habit, she said, I'm going to learn what it is. Then we'll know what fixing means. Aaron accepted that because children are kinder than gods. When Mirren left again, she took the original consent form, the vial of green thread, and the primer page showing roots without ears. She did not take the diagnostic slate from her pocket. It had gone warm again. It had written one word while she was kneeling. Claim. The lower ward was not on the public maps of the Hall of Restorative Works. Officially, it was a storage level for obsolete equipment, failed instruments, damaged slates, and older theological devices awaiting classification. Unofficially, every senior healer knew that third stair continued past storage. Every senior healer also knew not to ask where their stair ended unless summoned. Saville had given Mirren access. That should have made her feel powerful. Instead, each step down felt like accepting complicity in advance. The guard at the final door wore no medical colors, no priest's cord, and no unit mark Mirren recognized. His armor had been polished until it had reflected the lamp as a dull star. He had read Saville's order and opened the door without speaking. The lower ward was quiet, not empty, quiet. That was worse. Beds stood behind veils of thin gray linen. Chain metal had been worked into the wall braces, the instrument hooks, the lamp cages, even the floor drains. Each link carried an imperial stamp over older markings scraped almost smooth. At the far end, a circular table held restrained rings too large for human wrists and too small for anything Mirren wanted to imagine. A healer she didn't know approached with a slate clutched against his chest. Director Saville said you would come. Show me the divine adjacent cases. He flinched at the phrase. We don't use that category. I know. Show me anyway. Behind the first veil, a woman slept with her hands folded over her stomach. Flowers grew from the blanket around her. Tiny white blooms, scentless, opening and closing with each breath. Root change? Mirren asked. Agricultural restoration worker. Fell asleep in a famine field after channeling growth through salted soil. When they moved her, the field failed again. When they returned her, the crop recovered. So the village wants her back. The village sends petitions twice a week. Behind the second veil, a boy no older than 15 sat upright with his eyes covered by a dark cloth. Shadow application, the healer said. Courier training. He became difficult to remember. His mother was brought in to confirm identity and forgot him while signing the form. The boy turned towards Mirren's footsteps. Are you new? Yes. Can you write my name somewhere? What is it? The boy opened his mouth. No sound came out. The healer looked away. Mirren wrote, the nameless courier, pending recovered identity. It was not enough. It was something. Behind the third veil, an old man sat laughing softly at an empty chessboard. "Time debt," the healer said. "Borrowed 4 years for a military harvest acceleration. His granddaughter was born 63. Born elderly? Born remembering being elderly. Body normal. Mind not." Mirren gripped the slate until her knuckles paled. This was not a hospital. It was a recipe drawer. At the far end of the ward, one veil was darker than the rest. The healer didn't move toward it. Mirren did. "Not that one," he said. "Why?" "Because it answers." The chained patient was not dying the way mortals die. That was Mirren's first thought, and she hated it. Mortals, as if language could be placed between her and the figure behind the dark veil, as if the Empire had not built entire offices out of that distance. The patient lay on a stone bed, vined with chain metal. Their skin was the color of old ash under moonlight, not dead, not alive in a way that Mirren's training honored. Thin gold lines moved beneath the surface where veins should have been, brightening when the lamps dimmed, fading when someone spoke too loudly. Their wrists were bound by rings carved with imperial measurements. Their throat bore an old mark. A door half opened. Mirren stepped closer. One eye opened. It was not dramatic. No flash, no thunder, no God voice filling the room. Only attention. It made Mirren feel counted. "Healer," the patient said. The word sounded like forgiveness spoken by someone who had not granted it. Mirren looked back. The lower ward healer had retreated to the doorway. "Can you understand me?" she asked. "You ask that of everything before you cut it into categories." "I'm not here to cut you." "No, you're here because the cuts have started speaking." Mirren's mouth went dry. She set her slate on the edge of the stone bed. "What are you?" The patient smiled faintly. "A remembering inconvenience." "Were you a priest?" "Once. A servant. A witness." A door held open from the side for something too large to enter gently. "Vayreth." The lamps guttered. Every chain in the room tightened by the width of a breath. The patient closed their eyes until the pressure passed. "Do not say that name beneath imperial metal unless you want the metal to remember fear." Mirren thought of the copied ledger page. Disputed. The door symbol hammered flat. Corin's death ribbon cut black around his wrist. "The miracles are failing," she said. "No." "Then what are they doing?" "Keeping their promises." "People are being harmed." "People were always being harmed. Your empire preferred harm that looks like progress." Mirren wanted to argue, not because the patient was wrong, because Aaron was alive, and some part of her would fight anything that made his breath sound evidence against her. The patient watched the argument move across her face. "You have a child touched by root," they said. Mirren went still. "How do you know that?" "Because the roots know where they were carried. Because they pass news through stone. Because your grief has dirt under it." "Is he in danger?" "All saved things are in danger from the price of their saving." "That's not an answer." "It is the only honest one." Mirren leaned over the stone bed. "Then give me something useful." For the first time, the patient's expression changed. Amusement, perhaps, or sorrow that had learned to wear amusement because sorrow alone was too heavy. There speaks the empire through a mother's mouth. Mirren recoiled as if struck. The patient's voice softened. Don't hate yourself too quickly. Love also asks for tools. The sin begins when the tool is allowed to forget the hand it cuts. The slate on the bed warmed. Words appeared across it, not in imperial script, not entirely. Wound. You call wounds symptoms, the patient said, because symptoms can be managed. You call theft application because application can be funded. You call change restraints because restraint sounds kinder than fear. The gods put this into gifts? Some did. Some tried. Some only screamed. Some loved you enough to make stolen mercy costly, so you would stop stealing it. That's love? No, the patient closed their eyes. That is what love becomes when trapped under a knife. The chainmetal splinter was lodged beneath the patient's left wrist ring. Mirren noticed it because the ring had rubbed the stone raw around it, and the splinter had not moved. It was thin, dark, and matted, shaped like a shard from a broken link, no larger than Aaron's smallest finger. It should not have drawn her eyes, but every time the patient breathed, the splinter stayed still. Everything else in the room acknowledged the body. Blanket, chain, lamp, dust. The splinter acknowledged something deeper. May I? Mirren asked. The patient looked at her hand. You may look. Do not take. Mirren bent close with the lamp. At first there was nothing on the metal but scratches. Then the scratches rearranged. No, not rearranged, became legible because she had finally stopped telling herself they were damage. One word, Godscar. The lamp went out. The lower ward did not go dark. For one breath, Mirren smelled rain on stone, hearth ash, salt water, old paper, turned earth, and a cold wind moving beneath a door that had not opened yet. The diagnostic slates in Mirren's satchel lit one by one. Root, tide, memory, death, shadow, time, fire. Each category burned in its own colored script. Brown, blue, silver, black, violet, pale gold, ember white. Then the words collapsed inward. Godscar, Godscar, Godscar. Not a diagnosis, a name. Behind the veils, patience stirred. The flowered blanket opened all its white blooms at once. The nameless courier whispered something Mirren could not hear, and for 1 second she remembered a boy's face she had never seen. Somewhere in the ward, the old man at the empty chessboard laughed and said, "Too early, too late. There it is." The guard outside shouted. The patient opened both eyes. "Now you know why they will bury it." Mirren could barely breathe. Who carved the word? We did. They did. The wound did. Names happened when pain becomes too organized to remain a cry. Can it be healed? The patient's eyes moved to her pocket, where Aaron's consent form rested folded against her heart. Not by pretending the knife was medicine. The ward door opened behind her. Saville stood in the threshold. He looked at the lit slates, at the opened flowers, at the chainmetal splinter, at Mirren. If he was surprised, He disciplined surprise before it reached his face. "Callus," he said, "step away from the subject." The patient smiled. "There," they whispered. "Hear him make a person smaller?" Saville did not arrest her. That frightened Marin more than if he had. He escorted her himself from the lower ward to a report chamber 2 levels above the archive. No guards followed. No clerk was allowed inside. He poured water into 2 cups, sat one beside her, and didn't touch his own. "Write what you saw," he said. Mirren stared at him. "All of it?" "All of it." "Including the word?" "Especially the word." The trap was not hidden. It was not needed to be. Saville wanted the true report, not for the public, not for treatment, for containment. Mirren sat at the table. Her hand shook only once at the beginning. Then training took over. She wrote as if she had taught others to write. Specific, observed, accountable. No mystical flourish, no courtly evasions, no phrases that could be used to pretend a thing had not happened. Subject, Corin Vale. Delayed death continuance is not mere right drift. Subject demonstrates continuing relation to recorded death, sensory withdrawal, and possible last door rejection. Lower teth, tide blessing produces reclamation pressure and auditory phenomena consistent with drowned claim responses. Basha Arlen, memory work. Reclamation included external guilt, sealed event knowledge, and multi-voice testimonial intrusion. Memories appeared carried in divine medium, not generated by subject pathology. Aaron Callus. Her pen stopped. Saville stood at the window, looking out over the rain-silver capital. "Leave personal cases out, if you need to," he said without turning. There was no kindness in it, only strategy. If she included Aaron, the report became stronger, and her son became evidence. If she left him out, Saville would know exactly what she had protected and where to press later. The Empire loved omissions. It could build whole prisons from the places honest people looked away. Mirren wrote his name. Aaron Callus, root healing after childhood lung fever. Delayed root claim phenomena emerging years after sanctioned intervention. Subject reports locational awareness from root presence and dream contact with wounded root network. Case indicates saved life remains connected to the original divine source and possible reclamation structure. Her vision blurred. She kept writing. Cross-domain pattern. Stolen divine applications produce genuine benefits followed by domain-shaped wound. Effects are not random instability. They are structured, responsive, and relational. They carry memories of extraction, coercion, and misuse. Conclusion: the Empire's miracles are not failing, they are consequences. The gifts carry wounds hidden within them before Imperial control could become complete. These wounds answer use with cost. The common name, revealed through chain metal, manifestations, and diagnostic convergence, is Godscar. Recommendation: cease force divine application, suspend miracle licensing, release or ritually negotiate with bound divine servants, preserve all witness records without alteration, treat affected persons as claim bearers, not defects. She signed it before she could become afraid of signing. Mirren Callus, healer archivist of the Hall of Restorative Works. The rain thickened against the windows. Saville returned to the table and read the report from beginning to end. He did not interrupt. When he finished, he placed one hand on the final page. "This is very clear." Mirren said nothing. "That is going to be a problem." Saville sealed the report in black wax. Not red. Red was for review, correction, circulation. Black was for containment. Black was for records that existed so the Empire could say it had not been ignorant, while making sure no one else could say the same. Mirren watched the wax harden around the Imperial sunburst. "You asked for the truth," she said. "I did. Now you're burying it." "No, I'm preventing it from being used badly." "By whom?" "Everyone." He took a fresh stack of papers from a side drawer. "The court will receive a summary." A lie. A usable summary. He began writing as if translating a difficult text into a simpler language for children. The term Godscar is to be suppressed pending theological review. Cross-domain instability should be recognized by primary presentation. Recommended approved terminology. Death continuance irregularity. Affected fire residue. Tide lung. Pneumonic fever. Root intrusion. Shadow erasure. Temporal debt presentation. Public guidance should emphasize treatment, imperial oversight, and the risks of unauthorized priestly interpretations. Mirren listened to the scratch of his pen and understood, with a clarity that felt almost calm. How could civilization become cruel without ever hiring enough monsters to do the work? They hired careful people, people who loved order, people who could look at a wound and say the first duty was to prevent screaming, people who could bury a true name because the true name would make the injured difficult to govern. "You know this won't stop it," she said. "No, report stops pain." "This isn't pain, it's retaliation." Saville's pen paused. "That word also will not appear." "You can't classify a god into obedience." "Perhaps not," he resumed writing, "but we can classify people. We can move them, treat them, restrict them, protect them, quarantine them, draft them, release them, or bury them. People are the scale at which governance works." "And gods?" He looked up then. There was something in his eyes Mirren had not seen before. Not doubt, decision. Gods are the scale at which governance has failed. The room became very quiet. Mirren thought of the lower ward, chainmetal in lamp cages, the patient saying, "Do not say that name beneath imperial metal unless you want that metal to remember fear." "What are you recommending?" Saville sanded the summary dry. "That is above your office. My son is in that report. Your son is alive because the Empire was willing to use power priests only prayed around. My son may be claimed because the Empire stole what it didn't understand. Both can be true." That was the cruelest thing he had said all day because it was honest. He folded the summary. "Go home, Callus. Sleep if you can. Return tomorrow and continue your work. The affected will still need healers." "And my report?" He touched the black seal. "Your report will be preserved, where no one can read it, where no one can burn it." Again, not kindness, not entirely cruelty, something worse. A man building a cage and calling the cage a temporary shelter because the storm outside was real. Mirren left before she said something that would make Aaron motherless by morning. She didn't go home. The copy was imperfect. She knew that before she made it. No clerk's duplicate could carry everything the original had held in that room. The way the slates lit, the way the lower ward breathed, the way the word Godscar had not appeared so much as arrived. But records were not bodies. They didn't need to be whole to survive. Sometimes a fragment was enough to accuse the future. Mirren returned to the restricted archive after the 10th bell, when the night clerk had begun speaking softly to themselves, and the rain made the roof sound larger than the building beneath it. Hell was on duty at the archive desk. He stood when he saw her. Healer Kalis, I thought Director Salva dismissed. I need the Black Ledger Annex. Pell looked toward the inner doors. At this hour? Especially at this hour. He saw the folded papers under her robe. Mirren saw him see them. For one suspended moment, both of their futures waited on whether a junior archivist preferred safety to truth. Pell reached under the desk and produced the annex key. The gray clerk says pages turn when no one touches them, he said. Does that bother you? Less than the pages that never turn at all. Mirren took the key. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If anyone asks, I was cataloging salt damage in the tides file. You were? I am now. The annex was colder than before. The copied page from Sarah Ven's ledger waited in its black folder. Disputed. Had faded to ordinary ink again. But Mirren no longer trusted ordinary appearances. She laid Tavern Soul's Edrith report beside it. Then Nanmar's attached line. Then her own copy, page by page. Corin, Lore, Basha, the nameless courier, the flowered woman, the chained patient, Aaron. At the bottom of the final page, Mirren wrote the word again by hand. Godscar. The annex lamp dimmed. For a moment she thought the report would be rejected, that the ledger would close, the chains would tighten, and some older authority would decide she had no right to hide one more human failure among the dead. Cabinet lock clicked open by itself. Not loudly, a small sound, an invitation or a verdict. Mirren slid the pages behind Sarah's disputed record, beneath the copied ledger leaf, where a future hand searching for one impossible death might find a whole empire's diagnosis. When she withdrew her fingers, a smear of black ink marked her thumb. It didn't wipe away. She held her hand under the lamp. The ink formed a tiny door, not open, not closed, waiting. Director Salval's sealed recommendation reached the imperial court before dawn. Mirren did not see the chamber where it was read. She didn't hear the ministers argue over cost, jurisdiction, temple unrest, military necessity, port closures, harvest predictions, or the acceptable number of citizens who might be lost to a panic if the right word escaped into the markets. She didn't see the black wax broken. She didn't see the summary placed above the true report. She didn't see the first engineer summoned from the threshold workers beneath the Capitol, or the first priest ordered to surrender the old maps and doors below the world. She saw Aaron asleep. That was enough terror for one morning. The seam beneath his ribs was pale again. His breath moved in and out. On the table beside him, he had left the medical primer open to the picture of roots without ears. Beneath it, in a child's careful script, he had written a question. If roots don't have ears, do they listen with the ground? Mirren sat beside him and touched the ink door on her thumb. Below them, in the Hall of Restorative Works, clerks would hang the same classification boards: delayed death, devotional fever, tide lung, pneumonic contamination, root change. The patients would come. The Empire would name them separately and treat them separately and file them separately, because separate things could be managed. But in the black ledger annex, hidden behind a disputed death, another name waited. Not a symptom, not an instability, not a defect in miracle system. A wound. The first Godscar had learned its name. And elsewhere in the capital, Director Saville wrote the sentence that would begin the next age. If the gods can wound us from their chains, then the chains aren't tight enough. By noon, the threshold engineers were summoned. By dusk, the old priests were ordered below. By nightfall, the Empire had stopped asking whether the wound was real. It had begun designing a deeper cage.